Welcome to TDS, the Dark Stories. This is where we don't just tell true crime stories. We uncover the fear, the grief, and the chilling questions left in their wake. Today's story isn't from decades ago. It's not buried in old files. It happened in the quiet town of Moscow, Idaho. Just in 2022, 4 vibrant young lives were taken, in their own home, while the world slept. Let's dive into the details and listen closely. It was a cold November morning, November 13th, 2022. Students at the University of Idaho were wrapping up their weekend. Finals loomed, Thanksgiving was near, but on King Road, inside a modest off-campus house, horror was unfolding. 4 students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin, were murdered in the early hours of the morning. They were asleep, peaceful, until they weren't. The attacker used a fixed-blade knife. No one heard a thing, except, perhaps, one of the surviving roommates, who later said she saw a masked figure pass silently through the house. A figure with bushy eyebrows, walking calmly toward the back door. The killer left behind no obvious trace, except for one small but crucial mistake. A tan leather knife sheath, found next to Madison's bed. Inside that sheath, DNA. As investigators combed through hours of surveillance, cell tower data, and tip line calls, one thing kept showing up: a white Hyundai Elantra, seen circling the area near the crime scene. That vehicle? It belonged to Bryan Kohberger. He was no stranger to crime, at least not academically. A PhD criminology student at nearby Washington State University, just 8 miles from the victim's home. He studied killers. Now he was becoming one. Phone data placed him near the house 12 times in the weeks leading up to the murders, always late at night or early in the morning. And on the day of the crime, his phone went dark, completely off the network, during the time of the murders. But perhaps the most chilling part. After the murders, Kohberger returned to the crime scene, around 9 a.m., almost like he couldn't help himself. Investigators retrieved DNA from the trash at his family's home in Pennsylvania. It matched the DNA on the knife sheath, 99% match to Kohberger's father. That was enough. On December 30th, 2022, Bryan Kohberger was arrested. He has pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. The trial is set for August 2025 and will now be held in Boise. To this day, many questions remain. Why those victims? Was he stalking them? Did he know them? Was it a twisted fantasy fulfilled? Or is the story even darker than we realize?
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into a case that I think is still very much on people's minds.
Definitely.
The Idaho student stabbings back in November 2022. It's a really heavy topic, and there's just so much information out there.
There really is. It was such a disturbing event. And yeah, trying to sort through everything can be, well, overwhelming.
Right. So our aim today is to kind of focus things a bit, look at the core details that have emerged from the investigation so far.
Exactly. We want to hit the foundational stuff.
We've pulled from a few places for this. Obviously, key parts of the Brett Payne affidavit. That's where investigators lay out their findings.
For crucial document, that one.
Yeah. And also some summaries, like from Wikipedia, news reports, People, Fox 13, Seattle, Northeastern Global News had pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And even a Reddit thread we looked at where people were discussing, potential defense strategies.
So a real mix of sources.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal is to pull out the most, let's say, vital information.
Yeah, exactly. The timeline of that night, the main evidence presented, and maybe some informed thoughts on where the defense might go with this.
We're trying to get a clearer picture. Not necessarily every single tiny detail, but the stuff that really seems to matter as this moves forward.
Okay, let's start with the timeline then. November 12th into the 13th, 2022. What investigators have pieced together?
Right. So based on the affidavit and reports, you have Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan. They were out on Saturday night, November 12th.
At the Corner Club, right. local bar.
Yep, from about 10 p.m. until roughly 1:30 a.m. on Sunday the 13th.
And then they hit the grub truck, the food truck.
That's right. Around 1:41 a.m., there's actually video from the truck's Twitch stream showing them there.
Wow.
After that, private party gave them a ride home. They got back to the King Road house around 1:56 a.m.
Okay, and then Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle, they were out too.
Yeah, they were at a party on campus, Sigma Chi fraternity. They got back to the house a bit earlier, around 1:45 a.m.
So the surviving roommates told police all 4 victims were home by 2:00 a.m.
Correct.
But the night wasn't over. There were those phone calls Kaylee made.
Right, between 2:26 and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee made several calls to her ex-boyfriend. They went unanswered.
And Madison Mogen did too, to the same person?
Yes, between 2:44 and 2:52 a.m., also unanswered. Important to say, though, police looked into this.
And cleared him, right?
Yes, they determined he wasn't involved.
Okay.
Then later, around 4 a.m., there's a DoorDash delivery.
For Xana Kernodle, yeah.
Yeah.
The driver confirmed this with investigators.
And this is where things get really, really difficult, the timeline inside the house.
Yeah. One of the surviving roommates, DM, she reported waking up around 4 a.m.
What did she hear?
Initially, she thought it was Kaylee playing with her dog. Kaylee and Madison's rooms were upstairs on the 3rd floor.
Okay.
But then shortly after, DM said she heard someone who she thought was Kaylee say, "There's someone here."
But there's a detail about Xana's phone. Right. A forensic download showed Xana Kernodle was using TikTok around 4:12 a.m. So it's possible she was the one who said that. We don't know for sure.
Okay, so DM hears this. Does she look?
She looked at her bedroom door, didn't see anything the first time.
Then she heard more.
Yeah, she opened her door again later because she heard what sounded like crying from Xana's room.
Oh, man.
And then she heard a male voice say something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you."
And there was audio captured nearby, too.
Yes, around 4:17 a.m., a security camera at a neighbor's house, like less than 50 feet away from Xana's room.
What did it pick up?
It recorded distorted audio, sounds described as whimpering, a loud thud, and then a dog barking repeatedly.
Okay, so DM opens her door a 3rd time.
And this time, she sees someone.
This is a huge part of the affidavit.
Absolutely. She describes seeing a figure dressed all in black, wearing a mask covering the mouth and nose.
Any description.
She said male, 5'10" or taller, not super muscular but athletically built. And she specifically noted bushy eyebrows.
And this person just walked past her.
Walked past her, didn't engage, and then exited the house through the back sliding glass door.
What did DM do then?
She said she was in a frozen shock phase. Eventually, she locked herself in her room.
And then later that morning, the discovery.
Yes. The 4 victims were found, stabbed to death, in their beds on the 2nd and 3rd floors.
The 911 call, though, wasn't until much, much later.
Not until 11:58 a.m., almost noon. It came from one of the surviving roommates' phones. The call reported an unconscious person.
When police got there, what did they find initially?
They said the front door was open, no obvious signs of forced entry, nothing seemed to be missing right away.
And Kaylee's dog?
The dog was found alive inside the house, unharmed.
Just devastating. All 4 pronounced dead at noon. And investigators believe the killings happened in a really short window.
Yeah, they estimate between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., just a 25-minute time frame.
Such a tight window. Okay, let's shift to the evidence. The key findings from the investigation laid out in that affidavit. What really stands out?
Well, probably the most talked about piece is the knife sheath.
Where was it found?
On the bed, right next to Madison Mogen's body. There was tan leather.
Any markings on it?
Yeah, it had Kabar, USMC, and the Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor logo.
And the DNA?
That's the critical part. They found a single source of male DNA on the button snap of that sheath. Investigators say it's the suspect's profile.
That feels like a very direct piece of physical evidence.
It certainly is. And alongside that, you have the video evidence. Investigators did a huge canvass of security footage in the area.
And that led them to the white car.
Exactly. A white Hyundai Elantra, seen on video multiple times near the King Road house between roughly 3:29 a.m. and 4:2 a.m. that morning.
Okay, so the white Elantra becomes a major focus. How did they connect that car to Bryan Kohberger?
It took a couple of weeks, but on November 29th, a police officer at Washington State University, which is just over the border in Pullman, Washington,
Right, not far from Moscow.
ran a query for white Elantras registered at WSU. And it came back with a 2015 white Elantra Pennsylvania plates registered to Bryan Kohberger at an address near campus.
So they had a name and an address. Did they find the car?
Yep. Same day, another WSU officer found that specific Alondra, matching plates and all, in the parking lot of Kohberger's apartment building.
And they found he'd been in Moscow before, in that car.
Yeah, it turns out he'd actually been stopped by Moscow police twice earlier in 2022, August and October, driving that same white Elantra, same PA plates.
And he gave his phone number during one of those stops.
He did. That became important later.
Okay, so they have a suspect, a car linked to him.
Mm-hmm.
What about his movements that night, the cell phone data?
Right, this is another really significant part of the affidavit. They got warrants for cell tower data near the King Road house around the time of the murders.
What did Kohberger's phone records show?
His phone, the one linked to that number he gave police, it was using cell towers near his apartment in Pullman around 2:42 a.m. on November 13th. Then the phone's activity showed it moving sort of southeast, then south through Pullman. But then at about 2:47 a.m., it just stops reporting to the network.
Stops completely. For how long?
It doesn't ping a tower again until almost 2 hours later, around 4:48 a.m.
And where was it then?
It was connecting to towers south of Moscow, down near a place called Bryan, Idaho.
So there's a gap in the data right around the time investigators think the murders happened.
Exactly. The affidavit suggests this is consistent with the phone either being turned off, put in airplane mode, or maybe being in an area with absolutely no service right then.
Okay, and after it came back online around 4:48 a.m.
Between about 4:50 and 5:26 a.m., the phone's location data is consistent with travel south, down Highway 95 towards Genesee, Idaho, and then heading west back towards Pullman.
So the phone appears to leave the area after the estimated time of the murders.
That's what the data suggests, yes.
Did they find evidence his phone had been near the victim's house before that night?
They did. Investigators found his phone had connected to cell towers, providing service to the King Road area at least 12 times between June 2022 and the night of the murders.
12 times, wow.
Yeah. They also noted it briefly connected to a Moscow tower the day after the murders, November 14th. But they don't think the phone was actually in Moscow that day. And it hasn't connected to any Moscow towers since then.
So the investigators' conclusion in the affidavit is pretty direct about this phone activity.
Yes, they state clearly that they believe his phone activity during those early morning hours, specifically the gap when it wasn't reporting, is consistent with him attempting to conceal his location during the homicides.
Okay, that's a lot of detail from the prosecution side, essentially.
Right.
Let's switch gears. The defense. What might their strategy look like? We saw that Reddit discussion.
Yeah.
What kind of ideas were floating around?
Well, common theme was the idea of tunnel vision.
Meaning?
Arguing that police maybe zeroed in on Kohberger too quickly, potentially missing other leads or suspects. They follow up on everything.
That makes sense as a potential defense angle. What else?
His reported OCD came up. Some speculated the defense might try to use that to explain certain behaviors, like maybe the extensive driving patterns shown by the cell data. Could it be related to compulsive behavior rather than stalking or planning?
Interesting. What about the physical evidence? The sheath?
Oh yeah, definitely expect them to challenge the DNA evidence. How strong is the match, really? Is touch DNA reliable enough on its own? Could it have gotten there some other way, secondary transfer? Was the chain of custody perfect?
So questioning the link between the DNA and him actually being the perpetrator?
Exactly. And also things like the footprints found at the scene reports said they were from common shoes, like Vans, not exactly unique.
And the crime scene itself?
Potential contamination is almost always raised in cases like this. Was the scene secured properly? Could evidence have been compromised?
The house being known as a party house was mentioned too, right?
Yeah, the idea that it wasn't exactly Fort Knox. Lots of people might have come and gone over time. Could someone else have had access or a reason to be there?
And the car? The Elantra?
There was some initial confusion in early reports about the exact model year. The defense might try to exploit any inconsistencies there, suggesting maybe the car scene wasn't definitively his.
Okay, and the cell phone data. How could they counter that?
They'll likely argue it's not precise GPS. Cell tower data gives you a general area, not an exact pinpoint. And they'll emphasize that gap. The phone being off or in airplane mode means you don't know what it was. It doesn't prove he was at the house.
So trying to create doubt about what the data actually shows.
Right. And interestingly, some people in that discussion brought up the surviving roommates.
So?
Just questioning the timeline, the delay in calling 911. Not necessarily accusing them, but maybe using it to muddy the waters or suggest things aren't as clear-cut as the prosecution presents.
It sounds like the overall strategy might be about chipping away at the prosecution's narrative.
Yeah, pretty much. Frame the evidence differently, highlight inconsistencies, introduce alternative possibilities, anything to create that reasonable doubt for the jury.
Makes sense. Okay, let's just quickly cover the legal side. Kohberger was arrested way over in Pennsylvania, end of December 2022.
That's right, December 30th. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, plus 1 count of felony burglary.
And the prosecution is seeking the death penalty.
They are. They've made that clear.
There was a challenge to that from the defense, wasn't there? Based on autism.
Yes, his lawyers argued the death penalty would be cruel and unusual punishment for someone with autism spectrum disorder.
How did that turn out?
The judge denied that request. In Idaho, ASD can be considered a mitigating factor at sentencing, but it doesn't automatically rule out the death penalty.
And Idaho has that unusual situation with the insanity defense, right?
It does. It's one of only 4 states without a traditional insanity defense. You can't plead not guilty by reason of insanity.
So how does mental state play a role then?
It's still relevant for 2 things. Competency to stand trial, basically. Does the defendant understand the charges, and can they assist in their defense? Kohberger was found competent.
Okay. And the second thing?
It can be used as a mitigating factor during sentencing if he's convicted, arguing for a lesser sentence based on mental state.
Got it. And the trial itself isn't happening in Moscow?
No, they got to change a venue. It's scheduled to start August 11th, 2025, down in Boise, Idaho. Judge Stephen Hippler is presiding.
August 2025. Still a ways off. And the house itself, it's gone now.
Yeah, that was kind of controversial, but the King Road house was demolished back in December 2023.
Okay. One last point, forensic genealogy. That played a role here.
It was widely reported, that the DNA from the sheath was linked to Kohberger using familial DNA, specifically DNA recovered from trash discarded by his father.
And the match was strong.
Reports said over 99% probability. It's a powerful technique.
Though some experts questioned if it was absolutely needed here.
Right. Some suggested that given the other evidence, like the car and cell data pointing towards him, maybe traditional investigation would have gotten there anyway. And its general usefulness in all homicides is still debated sometimes.
And there was that detail about Kohberger possibly knowing about trash privacy laws since he was studying criminology.
Yeah, reports mention he might have known discarded trash doesn't have privacy protections, and there were even allegations he tried to hide his family's trash in neighbors' bins before the arrest.
Just adds another layer, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've walked through that incredibly detailed timeline. We've looked at the key evidence from the affidavit, the sheath, the DNA, the car, the phone data.
And we've considered how the defense might approach things based on some of the discussions out there, trying to counter that evidence.
It really paints a picture of the prosecution building this case piece by piece timeline, forensics movements.
While the defense is likely gearing up to challenge every single piece, questioning its interpretation, its strength, looking for reasonable doubt.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Looking at all these details, the affidavit, the potential defense angles, what parts of this case really stick out to you or raise the biggest questions?
Yeah, and what does it tell us about building these big cases, especially when you're relying so much on circumstantial stuff and complex forensic evidence like DNA and cell data?
It's definitely a case to keep following as it moves towards that 2025 trial date. And important to remember, we only see a fraction of the full picture right now.
Absolutely. There's likely so much more information that will come out during the trial itself. We'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds.